Welcome to the Compliance 911 Show, a no-nonsense podcast discussing hot topics for today's busy compliance professional. It's everything you wanted to know about regulatory compliance, but we're afraid to ask. And now, here are your hosts, Dean Stockford of M&M Consulting and Len Suzio of GeoData Vision.
Welcome to today's podcast on the Community Reinvestment Act. Today is the second of a two-part series called Teaching About the Community Reinvestment Act. And I'm joined by Linda Ezuka, our special guest speaker. She'll be joining me and, of course, Dean Stockford of M&M, who's my co-host on our podcast series. Linda is the founder of CRA Today and the CRA Hub, an exclusive membership service for banking professionals to master the art of the CRA and get exam ready and leverage capital for the greater good. Linda also leads the Hawaiian Bankers Association as its executive director. She hosts the CRA podcast, the podcast to elevate conversations around the Community Reinvestment Act. Linda has over 30 years of community development experience with emphasis on CRA compliance, CRA on-site and remote training, community development finance, CDFI investments, and partnerships. He has led CRA programs for large banks and has consulted with banks of all sizes and regulators. Linda, again, welcome to the second two-part series on CRA. And I can't think of anybody more qualified to discuss teaching people about CRA than someone like yourself, who's spent many years now focusing on teaching students and bankers about the Community Reinvestment Act. So welcome to today's session. Linda, it's good to have you here.
Great to be back. Thanks so much, Len and Dean. It's my pleasure.
Great. Well, in the last episode, we focused on the legacy CRA, what is in existence today. But everyone listening to today's podcast, I'm certain is aware that there's a new rule that was passed in 2023, which was effective April 1st, but has been stayed by court action, litigation regarding the new 2023 CRA. Nevertheless, everybody that I've been talking to that is involved with regulatory compliance is asking questions, many questions about the new CRA. And so I think it's appropriate to have this podcast to focus on the new CRA. And what you're doing is a teacher about the Community Reinvestment Act to your students. So my first question to you, Linda, is have bankers expressed concern and questions about the new CRA, and what are they saying to you regarding the 2023 CRA?
Sure. Well, I think that we all have many different views about the new CRA. I think that we can all agree that the CRA needs to be modernized to reflect our current operating environment. No questions there. I think we can also agree with the spirit of the CRA. I think that we all care deeply about the communities in which we live and work. Where we tend to disagree is how much is enough? How do we evaluate financial institutions and how to prove impact? That, my friend, lies the problem, of course, right? Our CRA professionals are very concerned about the complexities of the new rule. And, there's thousands of pages to read, to skim, to reread, to digest. And it's a little overwhelming. And I haven't met a CRA professional that is over-resourced. So many, right? So many are under-resourced and just not sure how they're going to take on a new rule as complex as what was passed. So they're still very concerned about the complexities and also very concerned and overwhelmed in terms of, during this period of time where we're under the injunction, how do I manage my current, the legacy rule and my performance? And then how do I start to approach learning about the impacts of the new rule as it relates to my performance? So I think that's always a challenge, is how do you balance it? And they're also waiting for the regulators to start to disseminate training. And I think that we all have many, many questions that go beyond just the surface level of what we understand to be true as listed in the Federal Register. There are so many subtleties to how we might implement it, and that gets a little overwhelming in the absence of clarity. So I think that's adding to some of the uncertainty and complexity and challenges. Now, I will say, though, I was around, and so were you, Len, in 1995 and 96, right, where we navigated the change in the reg as well. And I remember it was a confusing time, and it took a couple years for everyone to be in flow, right? To really understand the intent and to work through implementation. So what I do know is that when a new rule is finalized in whatever form it may be, that we will get through it, and we will get through it together, because bankers have one interpretation, regulators may have another, community another. We will need to come together to really work together to understand the true intent, as we start to work through the details of implementation and getting examined. So much, I know.
Yeah.
We can go on and on. I think there's so many concerns, but, I'll just stop there for now.
Like you say, the published rule was over 1,500 pages long.
Mm,
It's a bit daunting, to say the least. Ian,
absolutely.
Yeah, I didn't drink before that, Len, and now I took it up. So yeah, 1,500 pages of reading.
Oh my goodness. And whenever I approached it, every time I'd read more or take a deeper dive into a section, the more questions came up for me, right? I've been doing this 30 years, and this is even complex for me, right? There's elements that I still am not quite sure the intent of certain aspects of the rule, and more importantly, how it will play out in implementation. I think that is where we'll spend a lot of time, is implementation and interpreting some of the elements.
Yeah, I think you hit the nail on the head, Linda, right there, because once again, the anxiety that bankers have is a lot of the unknowns.
Yes. Right. And, I think many of us wrote comment letters, and I emphasized specifically in my comment letter that we really need our regulators to be in first position here in helping us with implementation and distributing the guides and all of the training well in advance of implementation to avoid confusion and overwhelm. And I hope that we have a very robust implementation and training plan within our agencies to support our financial institutions as we work to implement in earnest.
Agree. Linda, thank you for all of that information. So, what do you think about the new CRA rule?
Well, I'll tell you what I like, and I'm pretty excited since I've been a huge supporter of the CDFI movement over the 30 years of my community development career. I'm excited about the potential of partnering and with minority depository institutions and community development financial institutions, and really putting that front and center in terms of the desired outcomes of partnerships. And there's one element that I believe financial institutions underutilize in terms of CDFI partnerships, and that is participation loans. I know I'm taking a deep dive into here, but I think that the new rule allows so much more participation among these mission-aligned entities that can further serve disadvantaged communities and deploy credit where it's difficult to deploy, but in partnership with each other. So I believe the less utilized tool in that toolbox is participation loans, where A bank can be a lead lender and bring a CDFI within a large credit and maybe make the loan that they couldn't do alone, but bringing in the CDFI to improve their capital stack to make it possible. Now, when that CDFI comes into a credit transaction as a participation, then they can either be pari passu on the equal footing in terms of the any credit loss, or they can be in a first position to take the loss that further improves, of course, the bank's position to take on even more risk than that they would do alone. So it's a personal priority for me to really share how banks and CDFIs can partner through participation loans. But there's so much more that this new rule enables with minority depository institutions and the like. So I'm really thrilled about also opening up financial literacy to all. So just two aspects that I think are really special with the new rule.
Actually, I'm going to ask a correlated question. And
Yep.
one of the things is for the very first time, they not only have these benchmarks, but they've calibrated them so that you know exactly what you've got to achieve to get an outstanding performance rating, a high satisfactory, a low satisfactory, needs to improve, or substantial noncompliance. I'm just curious, what are your thoughts about the use of the calibrated benchmarks to more precisely measure and quantify a bank's performance? I know my clients have always been asking, what do I have to do to get a satisfactory performance rating? And there's never been a calibrated benchmark before. All we know is they've always been compared to other lenders and they've been compared to certain demographics, but it's never been possible to answer specifically what they have to achieve. I'm curious, Linda, since you teach hundreds of bankers and had many years of experience and questions, what's your take on the calibrated benchmarks?
Well, I think that we all want a little more rigor and we would like to have some benchmarks, but I think that there's a risk to benchmarks as well. If we rely upon them too heavily, then we lose the true essence of serving the credit needs of our community. No bank is the same. No community is the same. No community partners are the same with the same capacities, right? So I think while having some calibrated benchmarks might be a good tool, we won't know until we start playing with it and deploying and looking at performance and seeing if it truly is the sound way to move forward. But I also appreciate the opportunity to bring in performance context. I think without performance context or being able to defend our performance with more detailed information, I think it's risky. I think it's very hard to compare any community to another, any bank, right? I know why we're attempting the exercise. That's clear. But I think there's also a risk. I don't think that the CRA is necessarily broken in this aspect, that when we provide context, we're able to really share the larger story of what truly is happening in our community.
Well, Linda, thank you very much for that answer. And of course, we could talk all day long with respect to CRA and the new requirements and how everybody's feeling about it or not feeling about it. But, what are you doing, I guess, is my question, to help bankers, prepare for the new CRA? Do you have like certain training sessions that you're putting on for them? Are there, give me some insight, please.
Sure. There's two different ways that we convene around community development. One is the CRA Fundamentals, which is a 10-week course, and we offer that twice a year. And that covers the law, and it covers every aspect of the CRA so that in the current rule, and that foots to the law, you're well aware of the essence of the law and how then it is implemented through the current version of the CRA as you start to approach the new. Now, more specifically, within the CRA Hub, which is my flagship product and way that I serve, we're a community of peers. And so we have banks, small and very large, up to $1 trillion in assets. And we have new folks and seasoned folks. And we work on how do you lead your program today and how do you start to approach your program under the new rule. And what I recommend is that we stay focused on serving the credit needs and leading your program today under the legacy program and making sure that your program is solid, that has 3 lines of defense, that you are working through a good compliance management system and systems, and that you have sound data integrity. Also looking at your performance gaps and working to cure those. All of those efforts today will support you tomorrow as we transition to the new rule. So we balance both.
Wow.
We train on both, and we do training sessions for legacy so we don't lose sight on our fundamentals. And then we also train on the new rule so that we can handle both and we're ready. So
that's fantastic. And I appreciate that very much. And all of a sudden, as you were talking, another question came to my mind.
Sure.
Because all of it, well, we were always talking about, what are you doing to help the bankers? So my next question, I think, is a little bit, I think, on point. But do you ever work with community groups to train them on how CRA can impact their communities?
Well, I think that we need more of this in our industry, right? To look on the flip side, and how can you be a good partner to the bank? How could you elevate some of your key concerns on what the bank might consider to further meet the credit needs of a community, right? I think that all stakeholders need to come to the table with a shared understanding of the different vantage points. So while I don't train specifically, I would be open to more initiatives like that because I think it takes all of us at the table and we all need to understand what constraints each of us have so that we can work more productively together.
Excellent. Thank you so much.
That's great, Linda. Boy, I wish we could have an open-ended session, but we're coming up.
I could talk all day long, and I truly love the community development work that's before us, and I know that both of you do the same. So thank you for the opportunity.
Well, it's great to have someone, a professional like you, who's devoted their career now to serving students of the Community Reinvestment Act. And I'm looking forward. I think we could probably have a session itself on Section 1071, which obviously is not CRA itself, but it involves the collection of CRA data. It's brand new, and there's a lot of questions we're getting about that. And I think we could possibly have another episode we can schedule sometime in the near future about Section 1071, what it involves, how to prepare for it, and how it will affect the Community Reinvestment Act. And I just want to thank you again, Linda, today for being a guest on our show. It's great to have a professional like you to educate the audience, and we encourage our listening audience to visit Linda herself on her website. What's your website, Linda?
CRAtoday.com.
That's pretty straightforward and pretty easy.
Well, let's keep it simple. Keep it simple.
If you're interested in learning about the CRA and maybe even looking for someone who teaches about it, we recommend Linda Ezuka and CRA Today very highly. Again, Linda, thank you for joining us today, joined by Dean Stockford of M&M. I want to thank Linda for her great presentation and willingness to put up with our interrogation today. Thank you very much. This is Len Suzio, Data Vision.
Yeah, and this is Dean Stockford from M&M Consulting saying thank you for joining us today, and also to Linda and our listeners for tuning in to today's discussion. Please let us know of any additional topics you'd like to hear in future episodes.
Thanks for listening to the Compliance 911 Show. If you like the podcast, be sure to subscribe so you don't miss an episode. While you're at it, please give us a like and review to help others find the show. As always, links are in the show notes, and you can always find us online at compliance911show.com. Follow M&M Consulting and Geodata Vision on LinkedIn for all the latest news and information on compliance hot topics.